Hi, I'm Sue Rabati, and I'm the founder of MedShadow, and this is...
Jonathan Block. I'm the content manager for MedShadow.
Today, we're going to talk about what were the 3 big news stories of 2016. It's hard to imagine we're done with 2016 already, but before we sweep it out the door, let's revisit what we found fascinating, appalling, and interesting about the year. First up is opioids.
Yes, opioids kind of dominated, sadly, the news throughout the year because, as many of our viewers know, we're in the midst of an opioid epidemic and trying to get some sort of policies in order to turn that around, and unfortunately nothing seems to be changing, even though there was some legislation that was passed earlier this year that will increase funding for opioid addiction and treatment. There's still a long way to go before that epidemic is going to be appropriately tackled, unfortunately.
Too little is known about what the basis of addictions are, about how to help people get rid of their addictions, and we're getting too many drugs on the market too quickly. Fentanyl is the latest deadly drug, and I've been told that you cannot take fentanyl with any regularity and survive.
Well, the thing is that even now a lot of these manufacturers are coming out with so-called abuse deterrent versions of it. There are still ways that you can get around still abusing it. The other thing is that these drugs are still heavily marketed by these companies to doctors, even though the pharma companies know the inherent dangers of opioids and what can happen when you take them over the long term.
Well, I gotta say,
go right ahead.
Any doctor who is unaware of the addictive problems with opioid at this point should just hand in their medical license.
Well, maybe they do understand, but they're getting kickbacks from the pharma companies.
No, we need everyone on the same team here.
Oh, I agree.
The pharmaceutical companies need to ratchet it back, yes, but the doctors need to be able to say no, and the patients need to understand that sometimes life hurts and you can't always take a pill. Opioids don't even work in many of the cases that they're given to people.
Well, that's the thing you just touched upon, it is that patient education is really what's going to turn the tide with this epidemic.
I don't know what will, but hopefully
can't
maybe
hurt.
2017 will be the year we figure out the opioid
Fingers
problem.
crossed.
Yes. Next, 21st Century Cures Act. This is a classic example of don't believe headlines. Don't believe the name of acts. 21st Century does want to help create cures, and they're putting a lot of money towards the cancer moonshot. But there are many, many aspects of the 21st Century Cures that could end up being 21st Century hurts. One of the major problems I have with the 21st Century Cures Act is that it continues to rush the trials of drugs through the vetting process. It pushes the FDA to approve drugs faster than the FDA has ever been comfortable with.
And with less concrete data supporting it. That's the crucial thing. You could do it faster, that's one thing, but then to do it faster with less concrete evidence, that's a double whammy.
Right. So we very much want more money for research, but we also want a thoughtful, measured approach, because drugs that are pushed onto the marketplace can have devastating consequences for those who take them. Which now leads us to what I consider a sad example of a drug called
Exodansis 51,
Thank
also
you.
known as eteplirsen. This was a drug that was approved in the fourth quarter of 2016 for a condition known as Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Why are we discussing this? Because this was a drug that was approved with a trial of just 12 young boys. There was no placebo arm, because almost every other drug that is approved, they have to have a placebo arm to make sure that there isn't a placebo effect going on. This drug, Exondys 51, did not have a placebo arm. The other thing is that the actual efficacy of the drug was kind of iffy at best.
Without a placebo, it's hard to know what the efficacy is. This is a horrible disease. It's muscular dystrophy based. It only affects boys, and most of those boys affected with it don't live past their mid-teen years.
Correct.
So the drug hasn't been really tested long enough to show that it has a longevity aspect to it. Right. It has brought some numbers that are markers into better alignment. But and I'm all for letting people in dire circumstances use any drug that they want to. There's a process in place for that to happen.
There already
you
is.
apply
Right.
to the FDA. The FDA has virtually never said no to this process, and the pharmaceutical company, when possible, will go along when they've got enough drug to give out to it. So why rush this drug through the process? It doesn't make sense to me. The worst aspect of it, though, is that it's, first of all, since it's not proven to extend the lives of these children, but there's so few people affected with it in the USA and in the world,
Right.
that the other two drug companies that were developing drugs for this specific problem will probably not pursue it because the market's just not big enough to support more than
Known
one
as an
drug.
orphan drug, which is a drug that serves a very small market, usually under 10,000 people worldwide.
Which is
The other thing that I want to touch upon with you is the fact that this gives the young boys mostly who have Duchenne and their families false hope. The other thing is that what this process showed was how the FDA will approve drugs without concrete evidence when they succumb to public pressure. And a lot of that is because of patient advocacy groups. And many of them, if not most of them, do have good intent. But a lot of patient advocacy groups are actually funded by the very drug companies that are trying to get these drugs approved. So they have a major conflict of interest.
Yes, it does seem that any drug advocate, anybody testifying in front of the FDA who is a member of a drug advocacy group should have to also reveal where the funding for the drug advocacy group comes from.
Patient advocacy group.
Thank you, patient advocacy group. Anyway, so that is
Although in a
our wrap-up
sense,
for the
in
year.
many senses, they are drug advocacy because they're advocating for the drug company.
It's true.
True. Sorry, go on.
So Jonathan, is there any good news this year?
Yes, and that involves the growth of MedShadow, which has benefited our audience. The amount and number of resources that are available to the public have just grown immensely. In 2016, a good example of that is the Need to Know feature, which many of our loyal audience is probably familiar with. So we're growing by leaps and bounds, and we intend to further do so in 2017 and beyond.
Yes, MedShadow has grown substantially this year. We have more than 150,000 unduplicated website visitors every month. I believe that people are coming to the website because, just like Jonathan and I believe, most people want to know, is this drug going to help me a lot or a little? And are the side effects worth the risk of the drug? So please keep coming back to MedShadow, and we will keep trying to answer that question.
Thank you.